When I arrived at Blackwater River Correctional Facility at 8:15, there was an intake process where you gave your identification, they searched you, put the sticker on your hand and took you through the back to the visitation area. It took me like from 8:15 to 8:50 to get through. At about 20 minutes, when I was sitting and waiting for my son to arrive, I noticed that there were inmates coming from the back and being united with their family members, and my son wasn't there. So I wondered, I wonder what's going on. I decided to wait a little bit longer, and I waited for 15 more minutes when I saw a correction officer patrolling the area. So I called over to her and I asked her, how long does it usually take for someone to come from in the back? She said she didn't know because she was new, and that she would ask the presiding correction officer, Officer Norris. I watched her as she went up front to talk to him. And I saw her lean over, and he listened. And then he turned towards her, and using his hands fleeing about, body language, he said something to her. She stood up straight and she recoiled, and then she looked towards me very anxiously, and she didn't move. So I thought to myself, I need to go up here and introduce myself and let him know that I was the one who had the inquiry. So I did. I went up there and I introduced myself, and I told him that I'd been waiting for my son for quite a period of time, and he wasn't coming back, and I noticed that some other people were coming back, if he could just check. And he told me, and he looked very agitated. Put his hand up like this and saying, I'm taking care of it. And then I asked, well, what's the process? What's the procedure whenever there's a delayed entry like that? And he said, they make the call from up front whenever you first come in. I don't make that call. So I said, okay, and I went back to sit down. I waited another 10 minutes, 45 minutes into the visitation process now, and I still saw other inmates coming from the back, and my son hadn't came out. So I thought to myself, well, this can't be right. Sure, I can talk to someone. I'll just go back up here and talk to the officer, but I was a little bit apprehensive because of how agitated he seemed before. So I said, well, he told me that the call initiated from up front, so what I can do is I can gather my belongings and I can go back out, go to the front and be reprocessed all over again. And that way it could trigger a second phone call. So I went back up to the front and I told him, I said, I'd like to leave now because I can go back up front, be reprocessed, and that'll trigger the call, and we can see why it's taken this extended period of time for my son to come out. When I said that, the officer erupted. His face got so red, he clenched his teeth, and he said to me, as he put his left hand on his hip and this arm in the air, you ain't going nowhere. What you gonna do is go and sit down. And I just stopped. I was like, thinking to myself, why is he so angry? I am trying to get information. And then I said, I thought, and I looked at him, I said, are you talking to me like this? Are you talking to me like this? And he said, I will have you escorted out of here. And then he reached back and he grabbed his radio and he made a call and he said something. I assumed that he was going to have someone come down and escort me out of there. So I just stood there and I thought to myself, well, if someone comes, then maybe they can tell me what the whole process is, and I can get an answer, and I can do whatever it is I need to do. I hadn't seen my son for 3 months. We live 6.5 hours away. So my husband and I started on Thursday before this visit to try to get all the information that we needed to make sure that we did things correctly so we could enjoy visitation with him. I thought and I stood for a few seconds, and then finally I went to sit down. I didn't know what to do. We were right in front of the visitation area with all of these people and other correction officers patrolling, and no one said anything and no one did anything. I felt helpless and hopeless. I didn't know what to do. So I went back and sat down. And as I sat there, I saw another officer circulating around, the original one. Officer Burke was her name. And I asked her, I said, is there someone that I can talk to about this? I mean, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what's going on. And she said, you have to talk to him. And she pointed towards Officer Norris. So I sat and waited a little bit longer. And the people all around me had been seeing what was going on. So they started to talk to me, and they started telling me their own stories about how disorganized and chaotic Blackwater River Correctional Facility was, and how the processing machine was broken. And then there was another family member that was telling me how it took a long time for her son to come out. So finally, I saw another officer come in. She was the one from the front desk from earlier. Her name was Sergeant Watson. And she went in and she started talking to Officer Norris. And then she looked towards me and started making her way back to my table. When she approached me, I asked, what am I supposed to do? How can I get out of this place? And she answered me with a question. She said, don't you want a visitation? I said, yes, I wanted a visitation. But Officer Norris, said that he couldn't make the call. It had to be triggered whenever you came in. And then he told me I couldn't move. And if I said anything, he was going to have me escorted out of here. I was being held high. I couldn't do anything. I was being held there against my will. I couldn't say anything. There was no chain of command, no one I could talk to. And when I did try to ask someone for direction, they told me to go to the same man who had just been belligerent, threatening me, clenched teeth, red face. So she said, he's coming. She interrupted me and said, he's coming. I said, he who? My son? And she said, yes. So I said, all right. And I started to get hopeful. Then I saw the same Officer Norris start walking back towards where Officer Watson and I were talking. And she walked away from me. And then he pulled off his radio and he gave it to her. So I thought, oh, he's going back to make sure that my son gets up here. And I sat and I waited. After a little bit, my son came from the back. His face was broken and he was visibly affected. And he was looking like this. And everything just dropped again. I was devastated. And I looked at him with my eyes and he looked back at me. And we communicated, and my thing was, what's wrong? And I thought, well, this is why it took him so long. I was concerned, and I wanted them to see what he was going on with him earlier. Something surely happened. Maybe he got into a fight. He looked like he'd been into some horrible type of a disposition. So ordinarily, I would go up and I would hug him and then walk with him up to the intake table where Officer Norris was stationed. But I dared not move. With the way that this man had treated me, I feared to even move. So I sat there, and my son went up, and then he came over to the table. And I asked him, I said, son, what happened? What's been going on? And he said, Mom. He said, I was down there waiting for you because we planned this trip for 3 months. No one called me. I was on my bunk. And then I knew something was wrong and something was amiss because there was some irregular activity going on in the dorm. I saw the corrective officer that was over the dorm that day. He came in and he asked, where's Turner, 126? And so I said, you know, here I am. And he said, they've been calling you. You need to hurry up. Well, that wasn't an ordinary procedure. Ordinarily, they would have you go up, get a pass, and then come through. So I got up. I had my clothes laid out, and I got dressed, and then I went to the door, and I could see the captain, I could see Sergeant Burke, and I could see the correction officer of the dorm that was the head of the dorm. And the captain asked me, he said, hurry up, you need to get a pass, they've been waiting for you. So I got a pass and I went to the center gate where there was a guard station. And then from there, he escorted me to the shakedown room. Once inside the shakedown room, you have a table and you have a correction officer. Usually you have one correction officer, sometimes you have two. Well, I went up there with my pass, is what my son told me. I gave it to the correction officer for processing, and then I turned to go down into the shakedown room, and when I turned, I saw Officer Norris. And Officer Norris, I realized, had been standing right to my right side while I was facing the table, and he had a correction officer right here, lateral to me, just a little bit behind him.